In the endless, dark expanse of the galaxy, many dangers lurked, but only one name could stop wars before they even began: Vorthrax. Known as the deadliest dragon ever recorded, its very passage was an omen of annihilation. Entire star systems had fallen silent after it swept through, leaving planets broken and their skies burned black. No fleet had ever defeated it. No weapon had ever slowed its advance. The most ancient records didn't even classify it as a living being, but as a force of nature, an unstoppable cataclysm. When Vorthrax moved, civilizations simply prayed, and now, it was moving again. Above a small, remote human colony on the very edge of explored space, the stars themselves began to tremble. On the bridge of the colony's defense command, sensors screamed desperate warnings. Long-range scanners, one by one, overloaded and failed. Overwhelmed by an energy signature of impossible magnitude, the human commanders froze in their chairs as the image finally resolved on their main view screen. It was a shape larger than a battleship, with wings that stretched across the sky like a shroud of night. Its scales glowed with the intensity of molten metal, and its eyes burned with an ancient, terrifying fire. There was no doubt. The dragon had come. Instantly, alarms blared across the colony. Panic erupted. People ran through the narrow streets, grabbing their children, shouting names into the chaotic noise, their cries swallowed by the rising sirens. Evacuation ships frantically powered up their engines, but it was a hollow gesture. Everyone knew the truth. There was no escaping Vorthrax. Against the darkening sky, the colony's meager defense fleet rose to meet their doom. They formed weak, fragile lines against something far beyond their comprehension. Pilots swallowed their fear, their hands shaking on the controls as they struggled to hold formation, their faces pale reflections in their cockpit displays. Far away, in orbit, hidden alien observers watched in grim silence. The Galactic Council had placed these cloaked drones near the human colony long ago, a standard observation post, never expecting they would broadcast the final moments of a civilization. On the Council's homeworlds, leaders whispered nervously. Some turned away, unable to watch the coming slaughter. Others leaned closer, grimly fascinated, knowing they were about to witness an extinction event live. Vorthrax descended with a slow, deliberate grace, its massive wings folding as it hovered above the doomed colony. A wave of immense heat rolled down, so intense that buildings began to crack and metal buckled under the strain. The very air grew heavy, thick, and difficult to breathe. But the dragon did not roar. It didn't need to. Its silent, overwhelming presence was more terrifying than any sound. Though they knew it was useless, the human commanders opened all communication channels, a final, desperate plea into the void. Vorthrax had never responded to any communication. It only destroyed. That was all it had ever done. Weapons systems locked on. Missiles were armed. Orders were given with broken, trembling voices. And then, something happened that no one, in any corner of the galaxy, could have ever predicted. From the terrified crowd cowering in the streets below, a small figure stepped forward. It was a child, a little girl. She had slipped free from her mother's desperate grip and walked out into the open, her bare feet touching the cracked, superheated ground. Her hands were small and empty. Someone shouted her name in a choked cry. Soldiers screamed for her to get back, to run, to hide. She didn't listen. The child simply looked up at the apocalyptic vision in the sky, her eyes wide, not with terror, but with a profound, innocent wonder. Vorthrax noticed. For the first time in centuries of mindless destruction, the dragon paused. Its colossal head lowered slightly, and one of its burning eyes, an orb of fire larger than the child's entire body, focused on the tiny human below. A single breath could have vaporized her, and the city around her. But the breath never came. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Weapons remained locked, but no one fired. No one dared move. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the live feed, their own worlds falling silent as this impossible moment stretched on. The little girl took another step forward. She could feel her heart racing, her tiny hands trembling, but she kept walking. She didn't understand war, or legends of galactic dread, or the statistics of death that followed in the dragon's wake. All she knew was a feeling, deep inside her chest, that she couldn't explain. She felt that the terrifying creature in the sky was hurting. Vorthrax, in turn, felt a ripple of confusion in its ancient mind. Every living being it had ever encountered had run, or screamed, or attacked it with futile weapons. This small, fragile one did none of those things. The dragon lowered its head further, its scales glowing even brighter as waves of heat poured from its body. The ground near the child began to melt into glass. Still, she didn't stop. Then, she raised her arms. It wasn't a gesture of challenge, nor was it one of surrender. She raised them like a child reaching for comfort, for a hug. The galaxy held its breath. On the human command bridge, commanders shouted frantic orders to fire, to do something, anything. But their voices shook and their hands refused to obey. In the Galactic Council, alien leaders argued in a panic. Some demanded the immediate destruction of the entire colony, to eliminate whatever had captured the dragon's interest. Others argued that any attack would only guarantee their own annihilation. Vortherax stared into the child's eyes, and in the depths of its fiery consciousness, something ancient stirred. Memories, long buried beneath millennia of fire and rage, began to surface. A time before the pain, a time before the endless, lonely war, a time before it was twisted and forged into a living weapon. The child stood on her toes. Slowly, carefully, she reached out, her small lips pressed against one of the dragon's glowing, molten scales. The kiss was soft, gentle, and utterly impossible. In that instant, the suffocating heat vanished. The blinding glow from the dragon's scales dimmed. The air, once thick with menace, became still and silent. Across 1,000 star systems, screens went quiet as every viewer, from every species, tried to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Vortherax did not move. It did not strike. It did not burn the world. For the very first time in its long and terrible existence, the deadliest dragon in the galaxy felt something it had never known before. It felt peace. And in that single, fragile moment, born from an act of impossible empathy, the fate of the entire galaxy began to change. The sky fell silent. Across the human colony, a world held its breath, suspended between life and death. No sirens wailed, no cannons fired. Even the wind seemed too afraid to whisper. Dominating the landscape, the great dragon, Vortherax, remained motionless. Its colossal eye, a universe of ancient fire, was fixed upon the small child standing just below. Her lips had just parted from its glowing scale, a kiss of impossible trust. Yet, she didn't retreat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But the fear was gone, replaced by a strange, profound calm. All around them, human soldiers, without conscious thought, lowered their rifles. Their training screamed threat, but their instincts whispered that the universe had just shifted. On its axis, high above, in orbit, the Galactic Council chambers erupted into chaos. Impossible. One counselor declared, "It's a trick." Another insisted, "Fire now, before it learns mercy." A third demanded, but the order never came. Because Vortherax, the planet killer, the eater of stars, had not attacked. Instead, the dragon slowly, deliberately, lifted its titanic head. It scanned the human colony, not like a hunter surveying its prey, but like a weary traveler seeing a new land for the first time. It saw buildings, scarred but standing. It saw humans shielding each other, not trampling one another for the last escape pod. It saw parents wrapping their arms around their children, pulling them closer instead of pushing them aside. This was confusing. For uncounted centuries, every world Vortherax had descended upon had reacted with the same predictable script: panic, betrayal, and violence. The strong always crushed the weak to claw their way to survival. But here, the weak were being protected. A strange pressure built within the dragon's immense chest, a weight that had nothing to do with fire or fury. And then, a memory stirred, a flicker from a time so distant it felt like a dream. Long ago, before the galaxy learned to tremble at its name, Vortherax had been something else, not a monster, not a weapon. It had been young. In that forgotten era, ancient species had discovered its kind. They saw not a creature, but an opportunity. Dragons were rare, powerful, and malleable through pain. They had torn Vortherax from its homeworld. They had set its skies alight. They had slaughtered its kin. And then, they had taught it one singular, brutal lesson over and over: destroy, or be destroyed. Every planet turned to ash, every fleet shattered beneath its claws, carved that lesson deeper into its soul, until destruction was all it knew. Now, a small, fragile human child had done what no empire ever could. She hadn't tried to control it. She hadn't feared it. She had shown it kindness. With a slow, deliberate grace, the dragon's great wings began to fold inward. The oppressive heat hanging in the air started to fade. Across the colony, fires that had raged moments before dimmed and died. A collective gasp rippled through the humans. "She's alive," someone whispered in disbelief. The child finally took a step back, her legs shaky, and stumbled. Instantly, a soldier darted forward, catching her, pulling her into a protective embrace. Vortherax watched this, too. Watched the way the soldier instinctively checked her small hands for injury. Watched him place his own body between her and the perceived danger, an unspoken, unhesitating shield. Protection. Another concept it didn't understand. In orbit, the assembled alien fleets shifted, their commanders uncertain. Attack, retreat. Sensors showed Vorthrax's energy levels plummeting, a phenomenon never before recorded. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, spread through the council. If the dragon could change, the entire balance of galactic power would shatter. A council commander, desperate to regain control, ordered a warning shot, fired near the colony far enough to avoid hitting it, but close enough to provoke the beast. A brilliant lance of energy tore through the blackness of space. Vorthrax felt it. The dragon's eyes narrowed. For one terrible, heart-stopping moment, the humans on the ground believed it was all over. That ancient, familiar rage stirred in its core. Its claws flexed, digging into the earth. Its wings began to spread once more. But then, the child cried out. Not a scream of fear. It was a cry of worry. The sound stopped Vorthrax cold. The dragon looked down and saw her, clinging to the soldier, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for the dragon, afraid the galaxy would hurt it. No being in all of existence had ever feared for Vorthrax. The truth of that simple fact struck the dragon with more force than any superweapon. Its massive head turned, its gaze lifting past the colony, past the atmosphere, toward the stars, toward the fleets, toward the watching, waiting council. The sky darkened as its wings stretched to their full, terrifying span. On 1,000 alien bridges, every weapon system powered up at once. And then, Vorthrax did the last thing anyone expected. It lowered its head, not in submission, in warning. A deep, resonant pulse echoed through space. Not a roar, but a message, carried on a wave of ancient, primal energy. It contained no words, but its meaning was absolute. Stop. The energy from the warning shot, still hurtling towards the planet, simply faded, absorbed and neutralized before it could ever arrive. The dragon's message was unmistakable. Attack this place, and you will face me. Protect it, and I will remain. The Galactic Council fell into stunned silence. Down on the surface, human leaders finally opened communications, not with threats or demands, but with a single, humble request. Leave the child in peace. Vorthrax took a slow step backward, and then another, deliberately creating distance from the colony. It was giving them space, not taking it. A gesture of respect. The galaxy watched as history bent. The deadliest weapon ever known had not been defeated by force. It had been reached by understanding. And high above, a chilling realization dawned upon the council. If a species as young and fragile as humanity could pacify a monster like Vorthrax, then perhaps humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy after all. The dragon did not leave. That single fact sent a shockwave through the galaxy. High above the human colony, Vorthrax hung in the sky, its colossal wings beating slowly, not with anger, but with a strange, deliberate grace to maintain its balance. The sky remained dark under its shadow, yet no fire fell, no cities burned. Days turned into weeks, and still, the dragon stayed. Humanity held its breath. They didn't cheer, they didn't attack, they simply watched, and they hoped. On the ground, a small child named Elia sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, her mother's arm around her. Her tiny hands trembled, but her eyes were locked on the impossible creature in the sky. She felt a strange pull, a silent hum calling her attention upward, a feeling that resonated deep within her. Miles above, Vorthrax felt it too. The dragon's ancient mind, a maelstrom of fire and instinct, stirred with unfamiliar thoughts. For millennia, it had acted on pure impulse: strike first, survive, destroy. But now, something was different. Something was slowing those instincts, forcing the dragon to observe instead of react. For the first time in its immeasurable lifespan, Vorthrax listened. It heard the babble of human voices, carried on open communication channels, not commands, not threats, just voices, trying to understand. They spoke of fear, of their children, of protecting life, even when it seemed hopeless. To the dragon's old, cold logic, these ideas were a weakness, yet something deep inside its consciousness resisted dismissing them. Vorthrax shifted its massive body, adjusting its position ever so slightly, moving just a little farther from the colony. On the planet's surface, heat sensors registered the change. The temperature dropped. Plants near the initial landing zone, once scorched and dying, began to show signs of recovery. Human scientists watched their monitors in disbelief. Life is Stabilizing, one whispered, her voice filled with awe. In orbit, the Galactic Council's fleets remained on high alert, their weapons primed, but no one dared to fire. The dragon's last warning still echoed in their systems, a promise of total annihilation. The council itself was in chaos, their debates endless and circular. This is just a temporary lull, one leader insisted. It's toying with them, another argued, his voice tight with paranoia. No, a third replied quietly, the words hanging heavy in the chamber. It is learning. A chilling silence followed. They were all afraid, because a learning dragon was infinitely more dangerous than a raging one. Vorthrax drifted closer to the planet's upper atmosphere, its movements now marked by a newfound caution. It consciously adjusted its energy output, dampening its immense presence so the fragile beings below could breathe a little easier. It watched them work. It saw humans repairing damaged buildings, side by side. It saw them sharing food, distributing supplies to everyone. It saw them treating the injured without asking who deserved help first. No one bowed to the dragon, no one offered it praise or worship. They simply lived. This confused Vorthrax more than anything else. In its long, violent existence, other beings had only ever done two things. They either worshipped it as a god, or tried to kill it as a monster. These humans did neither. They acknowledged the cataclysmic danger hanging over their heads and just continued. The dragon's mind, a library of ancient memories, searched for a precedent. It found nothing. Down below, Alaya stood again near the edge of the open ground. This time, soldiers watched her closely, but they didn't stop her. She wasn't running toward the dragon, she was just standing still, her posture radiating an impossible calm. Vorthrax noticed her stillness. Slowly, carefully, it lowered its head again, but not as close as before. This time, it stopped at a distance that conveyed respect, not dominance. The dragon sent a pulse of pure thought toward the child. Not words, but feelings. An ocean of loneliness, a universe of loss, an eternity of fire. Alaya gasped and collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the dragon's sorrow. Humans rushed to her side, but she raised a hand to stop them. I'm okay, she whispered, her voice shaking. But she understood. The dragon wasn't cruel. It was tired. Vorthrax felt her response ripple back, a soft, gentle echo in its mind. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hatred. It was understanding. The connection stunned the dragon. No species had ever responded without trying to attack or control its mind. The child's thoughts were simple, pure. You don't have to hurt anymore. The dragon recoiled slightly, not from pain, but from the idea itself. Was such a thing even possible? High above, in the Council's command ships, scientists intercepted the strange energy patterns flowing between the dragon and the child. Panic erupted. It's a psychic bond, one reported, his voice cracking. Break it now, a commander ordered. We can't, came the frantic reply. We don't know how. Fear curdled into desperation. If humans could truly connect with Vorthrax, they could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. A secret order was given. On the far side of the system, a covert weapon powered up, a weapon designed to sever neural links, to erase minds. The strike was silent, invisible. It hit Alaya first. She screamed. Vorthrax felt it instantly. The child's pain ripped through the dragon's mind like a second birth of fire. The ancient, primal rage surged back, stronger and more absolute than ever before. The sky went black. Energy levels spiked beyond anything ever recorded. The ground shook violently as the dragon rose, its wings spreading wide, ready to burn the very stars from the sky. But then, Alaya's scream turned into a cry, not of fear, but of apology. Through the pain, through the psychic static, her thought reached the dragon. I'm sorry, she whispered. They're just scared. The dragon froze. That single, selfless thought cut through the inferno of its rage. Vorthrax looked down and saw the impossible. It saw humans shielding the child with their own body, standing against a being that could erase them in a single breath. They weren't perfect. They were terrified, but they still chose to protect. Slowly, painfully, Vorthrax wrestled its own power back into submission. The covert weapon, caught in the backlash of the dragon's immense restraint, overloaded and failed. Across the galaxy, a collective breath was released. In that moment, Vorthrax understood something vital. Peace wasn't an absence of conflict. It was a battle, a constant, difficult struggle. And humans, flawed and frightened as they were, might be the only species brave enough to fight it. The calm did not last. High above the human colony, where peace had settled like a fragile dust, the stars began to move. Vorthrax, the great cosmic dragon, felt it first. It was not a sight or a sound, but a disturbance in the deep currents of space itself. Ships were shifting their positions. Weapon systems were coming online, humming with a deadly charge. The pervasive fear that had gripped the galaxy was hardening, solidifying into a terrible decision. The Galactic Council had made up its mind. Peace, they had decided, was far too dangerous. If these insignificant humans could soothe the galaxy's most feared dragon, what else could they do? If Vorthrax could be calmed, then perhaps the very fabric of galactic society could be changed. Old powers, ancient dynasties that had ruled for millennia, would crumble. The carefully constructed hierarchies that maintained their control would break. The Council would not, could not, allow that to happen. From the silent, inky blackness, hidden fleets emerged from stealth. Not just a handful of ships or a single squadron, but hundreds. Warships, sleek and menacing, formed tight battle lines around the colony's star system, creating a cage of steel and energy that trapped both humans and dragon alike. On the planet's surface, human sensor rays screamed with warnings. Red lights flashed across control rooms, and alarms blared a symphony of impending doom. A senior commander, his face pale, stared at the tactical display. "They're targeting everything," he whispered, his voice trembling, "including us." Panic, a familiar ghost, began to spread through the colony once more. But this time, something was different. Humans did not scatter and run for shelter. They stood their ground. They looked up at the sky, not in terror, but with a strange, defiant unity. In the void above, Vorthrax slowly lifted its colossal head. Its eyes, which had softened in the presence of the child, now burned with a new, intense light. It was not the fire of rage, but the cold, sharp light of clarity. The dragon understood now. The Council didn't fear its destructive power. They feared change. They feared a future they could not control. A broadcast from the Council cut through every communication channel. Its tone as cold and final as a tomb. By decree of the Galactic Council, the entity known as Vorthrax is hereby declared a universal threat. The human colony on this world is designated an acceptable loss. The words echoed through the system, across the planet, and into the heart of every living being. Down on the ground, the little girl, Alaya, heard them. Her small hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. "They're going to hurt everyone," she said softly, her voice filled with a profound sorrow. Vorthrax felt her fear, as sharp and real as a physical blow. But it wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for her people, for her home, for him. And that selfless fear ignited something within the ancient dragon that was far stronger than rage. It was resolve. With a movement that seemed to ripple through spacetime, the dragon moved, not toward the safety of the colony. It moved toward the fleets. Space itself trembled as Vorthrax rose fully into the void, a titan against the backdrop of distant stars. Its wings spread wider than they ever had before, eclipsing the light of the local sun. A river of ancient, controlled energy surged along its crystalline scales, crackling with unimaginable power. The Council fleets didn't hesitate. They opened fire. Thousands of particle beams and plasma torpedoes crossed the void, a storm of destruction carrying enough power to erase entire planets from existence. Vorthrax did not dodge. It did not evade. It shielded. A massive, shimmering energy field burst outward from the dragon, wrapping around the human colony like a second, ethereal sky. The first devastating wave of attacks slammed into the shield and simply vanished, absorbed without a trace. In the colony's science labs, human researchers stared at their screens in stunned disbelief. "It's protecting us," one of them breathed. The second wave of fire came faster, more concentrated. Vorthrax let out a roar, not a sound of anger, but one of pure command. And in response, space itself seemed to bend to its will. Enemy warships suddenly lost power, their lights flickering out as they began to drift helplessly. Weapons systems shut down. Engines went cold. The dragon was not destroying them. It was disabling them, disarming them. That choice sent a shockwave of confusion across the galaxy. On the Council's command ship, a high-ranking official slammed his fist on a console. "Why isn't it killing them?" he shouted into the comms. The answer was simple, yet profound. Vorthrax had learned something new from the humans. Killing was easy. It was an instinct it had known its entire life. But restraint, that was a power far harder to master. From the ground, Elia watched the silent, beautiful, terrifying battle unfold. The sky was filled with light, a deadly aurora borealis. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not look away. All around her, humans huddled together, holding hands, their collective courage a silent promise that they would not abandon one another. Vorthrax felt that unity, that shared strength, like a steady, warming flame in its own heart. Growing desperate, the Council activated its final, terrible weapon, a planet cracker. A beam of focused, apocalyptic energy began to charge, a star being born in the heart of a massive warship, aimed directly at the colony's shield. If that weapon fired, nothing would remain. Not the humans, not the dragon, not even the memory of this place. Vortherax felt the immense weight of that weapon's power gathering. It knew that even its own formidable shield might not survive a direct blast of that magnitude. For a fraction of a second, the dragon hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, a lifetime of memories flooded its consciousness. Every battle it had ever fought, every time it had chosen destruction because survival demanded it. But now, survival demanded something else entirely. It demanded a choice. And so, Vortherax sent a final message, not through sound or light, but through the very fabric of the cosmos. It was not a message for the Council. It was a message for everyone, every species, every system. The dragon showed them the truth, not with words, not with threats, but with memories. Beings across the galaxy saw the dragon's past. They saw a young, terrified creature stolen from its nest. They saw it forced into wars it did not understand. They saw its centuries of endless, crushing loneliness. And then, they saw the humans fragile afraid, and yet, still standing, still protecting each other, still choosing kindness in the face of annihilation. Across countless worlds, beings watched this silent broadcast and wept. Some fleets lowered their weapons. Others hesitated, their resolve shaken. But the Council did not stop. The planet cracker fired. A piercing scream tore from Elias' throat. But Vortherax moved faster than thought. With a final, desperate act of will, the dragon wrapped its entire body around the colony's shield, becoming a living armor, and took the full force of the blast head-on. Space erupted in a blinding, silent explosion of white light. The energy tore across its ancient scales, cracking armor that had withstood supernovas. The dragon roared in unimaginable pain, a sound that echoed not in the void, but in the minds of all who watched. But it did not pull away. Then, as quickly as it began, the beam faded, the light died down, the shield held. Battered and scorched, Vortherax fell back from the shield, wounded, drifting powerlessly in space. For a moment, the entire galaxy went silent. From the planet below, human cries rang out, a chorus of grief, believing their protector had fallen. Elia ran forward, heedless of any danger, screaming its name into the sky. Then, slowly, agonizingly, Vortherax stirred, burned, broken, but still alive, and still positioned between the colony and the cold, empty stars. A new kind of fear now gripped the Council fleets. Not fear of a monster, but fear of a martyr. They began to retreat. It wasn't an organized withdrawal. There were no orders. They simply fled, because they had witnessed something they could never unlearn. The galaxy's deadliest dragon had chosen peace, and it had been willing to die for it. As the stars finally calmed, and the last enemy ship vanished into hyperspace, Vortherax turned its tired gaze back to the small planet below, to the humans, to the child standing there, looking up with tears of relief. And for the first time in its long, lonely existence, the great dragon felt something stronger than fear or fire. It felt like it belonged. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than war itself. Burned fragments of Council ships drifted through the dark like broken promises. The fleets that survived retreated, into distant jump points, too afraid to stay, too ashamed to fight again. Between the stars and the human colony, one figure remained, Vortherax, wounded, but still guarding. Its massive body bore deep, jagged cracks where ancient scales had split under the planet cracker's blast. Faint, blue energy leaked from those wounds, lighting up the void like slow-burning embers. On the ground, human medics stood helpless, staring at the sky. "How do you heal a dragon?" one whispered. No one had an answer. Elia stood at the edge of an open field, her gaze locked on the wounded titan above. She could feel the dragon's pain now, a deep, resonant ache that echoed in her own chest like a distant storm. "He's hurting," she said, her voice barely audible. After what felt like an eternity, the human leaders made a decision. They didn't ask for permission from the Council. They didn't wait for a safety guarantee. They opened all communication channels and sent a single, simple message into the void. "We will help." There were no demands, no conditions, just a promise. Vortherax heard it. The dragon had expected fear after the battle. It had expected hatred or demands for a reward. That was the currency of the galaxy. Instead, it saw something impossible. Small, unarmed ships launched from the human colony. They were slow, clearly vulnerable, and they were flying directly toward its massive form. Council observers, watching from afar, panicked. "They're insane," one said, his voice trembling. "He'll vaporize them." But the ships kept coming. Vortherax could have destroyed them without even a thought. Its ancient instinct screamed danger, warning it of a trick, but it did not move. The human ship stopped at a respectful distance. Medical lights activated, and gentle scanning beams touched the dragon's wounds, as soft as hands asking for permission. In that moment, Vortherax felt something it hadn't experienced in millennia: trust. The great dragon allowed the scans. On the ground, human scientists worked frantically, adapting tools that were never designed for something so ancient, so biological, so powerful. They deployed energy stabilizers, cooling fields, and tiny repair drones guided by care, not by control algorithms. The process was slow, it was agonizing, but it was working. The fierce glow from Vortherax's wounds began to dim. The dragon released a low, rumbling sound, not a roar of aggression, but a deep vibration of pure relief. Across the galaxy, live feeds spread like wildfire. Every species, on every world, watched as humans healed the very being they had once feared most. The Galactic Council reconvened in an emergency session. The chamber, usually filled with shouting and political maneuvering, was silent. There was no pride left. There was only the heavy weight of realization. A senior counselor, his face etched with shame, finally stood. His voice was heavy. "We created monsters," he said, "and then we blamed them for surviving." One by one, other council members stepped forward. They ordered their fleets to stand down. Sanctions against humanity were lifted. Secret weapons programs, designed to fight beings like Vortherax, were exposed and shut down. And then, the council issued something never before recorded in galactic history: an apology, not just to humans, but to Vortherax itself. The message traveled slowly through space, carried on ancient frequencies, reaching the wounded dragon. Vortherax listened. It didn't respond right away. Its gaze fell upon the human colony, so small, so fragile, yet so bright with life. It saw Alaya, standing with her mother, watching the sky with worried eyes. Vortherax felt the bond between them, steady and strong, a connection now forged by choice, not just by shared pain. Finally, the dragon answered, not with words, but with action. Vortherax slowly moved away from the colony, creating a safe distance so humans could live without the shadow of its presence. But it didn't leave the system. It remained nearby, watching, guarding. The galaxy understood the message perfectly. The dragon was not owned. It was not controlled. It had chosen its place. Human leaders met with council representatives, and the sessions were broadcast for all to see. The humans spoke plainly. "We do not rule the dragon," the lead diplomat stated. "We do not command it. We only showed it a different path." That simple truth shook the foundations of the galaxy more than any war ever had. If kindness could disarm an ancient weapon of unimaginable power, then fear was never the strongest force after all. Back on the colony, Alaya felt Vortherax's thoughts gently fade from her mind, like a warm presence stepping back to give her space. She smiled through her tears. "It's okay," she whispered to the stars. "You can rest now, far away." Vortherax settled into a stable orbit round a distant gas giant, its colossal form resting among the glowing, swirling clouds. The starlight reflected off its newly healed scales like moonlight on calm water. For the first time in its endless, violent life, the dragon slept peacefully. Across the galaxy, borders began to change, not by force, but by agreement. Species that once built weapons began dismantling them. Old wars ended quietly, without fanfare, not because they feared Vortherax's wrath, but because of what Vortherax now represented: a truth that no council, no fleet, no empire could hide anymore. The deadliest dragon in the universe had been stopped by compassion, and the species capable of that compassion, humans, were no longer underestimated. They were no longer seen as a primitive, fledgling race. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. They were the ones who had taught the universe that the greatest power wasn't a weapon, but an open hand. Time passed, not days or weeks, but years. The galaxy, that vast, stardusted tapestry, changed, slowly at first, like a tide turning far out at sea. Then all at once, in a rush of breaking waves, old borders, those imaginary lines drawn in fear, began to fade. Ancient enmities, passed down through generations like bitter heirlooms, lost their grip. Stories, once whispered as warnings, were now told as lessons. And the name Vortherax was spoken differently. No longer a curse spat in the dark, but a lesson learned in the light. The dragon remained near the human system, a silent titan resting among the swirling pastel clouds of a gas giant it had claimed as its home. Its wounds, once gaping reminders of a brutal war, had healed. They left behind scars that shimmered like constellations frozen onto its metallic hide. A map of battles fought and survived, but Vorthrax no longer slept alone. Human ships, sleek and purposeful, would often pass by. They weren't guards, standing watch over a caged beast. They weren't masters, asserting dominance. They were simply neighbors. They always kept a respectful distance, their engines humming a peaceful tune. They never pointed their weapons. Crucially, they never asked the dragon to fight for them. That choice, that quiet act of trust, mattered more than any treaty. And she grew. The small child who had reached out and kissed the deadliest creature in the known universe became a living symbol across the galaxy, a symbol of hope, of a different path. But to her own people, on her own world, she was still just Alaya, a girl who loved the feeling of an open sky above her and the solace of quiet moments. She often found herself at the edge of the colony, standing beneath the pinprick stars, feeling the gentle, humming presence of the dragon's thoughts brushing against her own. They didn't speak with words. They simply listened to the universe together. Vorthrax listened too. It watched humanity. It saw them build gleaming new structures, repair what was broken, and push their ships out into the unknown. It saw them argue, their voices passionate and clashing. It saw them fail, spectacularly at times. And then it saw them get up, dust themselves off, and try again. They were not a perfect species. Far from it. They made mistakes. But they learned, and to the ancient, powerful mind of the dragon, that was something entirely new. Across the star lanes, the Galactic Council was no longer the monolith of power it once had been. Its grand chambers, once places of rigid command and unwavering decrees, had transformed into arenas of lively, sometimes heated, debate, fear. The old puppeteer no longer pulled every string. In a move that sent shockwaves through the established order, the Council rewrote its foundational text, the Doctrine of Power. For the very first time in galactic history, compassion was officially listed as a form of strength. Of course, some resisted. Old empires, built on foundations of conquest and intimidation, crumbled under the weight of this new philosophy. But in their place, new alliances rose not through the might of fleets, but through the power of cooperation. Humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy. They didn't need to. They influenced it, simply by their example. One day, a distress call echoed across the subspace networks. It came from a distant, unfamiliar system. A world was dying, its sun beginning a violent, premature collapse. No fleet, no matter how fast, could possibly reach it in time to help. The Council hesitated, trapped between the desire to act and the reality of their limitations. And then, they all felt it. A subtle, yet unmistakable shift in the fabric of space. A ripple of immense power, moving with impossible speed. Vorthrax moved. The dragon didn't ask for permission. It didn't wait for praise. It simply flew. It blazed across unimaginable distances, a living comet of energy older than the stars themselves. It arrived at the dying world and unfurled its power like a vast, cosmic shield, absorbing the stellar flares, stabilizing the celestial chaos, buying precious time until other help could arrive. The inhabitants of that system, huddled in their shelters, watched in utter disbelief as the monster from their darkest legends became their unexpected savior. The news spread like wildfire. The dragon was no longer just a legend, it was an active force in the galaxy, and that made some very nervous. Fear, that persistent weed, began to sprout again in the corners of the galaxy. Elia heard the whispers, felt the anxiety rippling through the collective consciousness. "They're scared again," she said quietly, speaking to the stars during one of her silent vigils. And Vorthrax answered, not with words, but with a feeling, a deep, resonant calm that flowed through their unique bond. Fear would always exist. The difference now was that everyone had a choice in how to respond to it. Years later, a much older Elia stood before the Galactic Council. She wasn't there as a ruler, or a diplomat, or a hero. She was simply a witness. She looked out at the assembly of beings from 1,000 worlds and spoke with a simple, unadorned clarity. "I didn't stop the dragon," she said, her voice steady. "I just showed him he didn't have to be alone." A profound silence filled the chamber. No one argued, no one debated, because the truth of her words was hanging in the very air they breathed. For eons, the galaxy had created its own monsters out of fear and isolation. Humanity had simply been the first to break the cycle. As Elia continued to age, her life a long and peaceful one, Her psychic connection to Vorthrax began to fade, gently, naturally, as all things eventually do. But the bond itself never broke. It simply transformed. It became a memory. It became a legacy. One final time, as Elia's life reached its quiet, peaceful end, Vorthrax felt it across the light years. A soft, final goodbye. That night, the great dragon circled the human world once, a silent, unseen shadow against the stars, a final, solemn honor for the one who had changed everything. Then it turned and flew back to its home among the gas giants' clouds and beyond, into the greater darkness of space. Not as a weapon, not as a god, but as a guardian. Centuries passed. New species rose to prominence. Old ones faded into memory. History dutifully recorded the endless cycles of war and peace, the triumphs and the tragedies. But one story, just one, was never forgotten. It was passed down not because it was filled with fire and fear, but because it was filled with hope. The deadliest dragon in the galaxy had chosen peace, not because it was forced, not because it was defeated, but because a single human child had believed it could. And that one simple act of belief had been powerful enough to reshape the universe. The galaxy, in its own slow, meandering way, had finally learned a fundamental truth. Power can shatter worlds, yes, but kindness, true kindness, can change fate itself. And humanity's greatest strength was never its weapons, or its ships, or its ambition. It was, and always would be, its heart. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.